we are interested in whether or not people save enough voluntarily for retirement. And this is a highly debated question, which is of course very important, because if they don't save enough voluntarily, then we may want to force them to save, as is done in more so in many European countries. Now, there's a lot of research on retirement and kind of this broader question of whether people save enough or not for retirement. And I would say there are two topics that have been researched a lot, and this is the consumption after retirement, and in particular, the fact that the empirical observation that consumption falls at retirement. So there are a bunch of research papers that have been documented this fall in retirement, fall in consumption at retirement. And so the explanation here is very debated. Initially, the explanation was something like, well, maybe people face unexpected adverse shocks, or maybe they didn't save enough for before retirement, so then they have to adjust consumption after retirement. But then there was a series of very influential papers that said, like, well, maybe it's only spending that falls at retirement and not actually consumption or consumption utility, or more specifically the marginal utility of consumption that is smoothed even though spending falls but not consumption. And then there's kind of like another empirical observation that is also not as much research, but researched quite a bit. And this is the observation that savings or wealth seems to increase after retirement. So there are some papers that document that. And here, the leading explanation is that people start saving after retirement because of longevity and medical expense risk. So there are two empirical observations, one that consumption falls after retirement, and then that wealth increases after retirement, that are both not consistent with kind of like a standard consumption smoothing life cycle model. And the leading explanations are something like work-related expenses, that spending falls after retirement, and then medical expense risk and longevity risk. So what we're going to do is we're going to also look at spending and savings around retirement using transaction level panel data from people's bank accounts. And we kind of look at something what I think is like the convex combination of these puzzles. That is, we look at savings around retirement. So we don't look at savings after retirement, and we look a little bit, but we don't focus on spending around retirement, but we look at savings before versus after retirement and consumer debt, which is a little bit like this savings before and after retirement. And we can see what we can learn from looking at the path of savings before and after retirement. I think this is kind of at the intersection of the two puzzles, and there's very few papers that look at households' balance sheets around retirement. So the only two we know is one that looks at financial fee payments and the other one that looks at household portfolios. All right, so as mentioned, we use bank account data. It's from a financial aggregation app, and this app is from Iceland. And looking at using Icelandic data in the setting is, I think, particularly interesting for a couple of reasons. So A, we have an incredibly complete and clean picture of spending and people's liquid savings, like their cash sitting in their savings and checking accounts, and their consumer debt, which is something like credit card debt or overdraft debt, which is very common in Iceland. So now we have a very complete picture of spending and checking and savings account balances, because in Iceland people do not really use cash. So ATM withdrawals are only a very small fraction of what we see going on in checking and savings accounts. Then we have a fairly representative sample. When you work with app data, you always have to worry that it's a very young tech-savvy population. So here we have a bunch of people, for example, that retire. So we have enough power to look at the savings around retirement. Then the categorization is very interesting. It's very comprehensive. So I also work with US data from fintech app and bank account data, and there things are a little bit more messy. And then all accounts in Iceland are personal, so people can link each other. So we have those links and we can use those for robustness checks. But when we see somebody's checking account overdraft, then that is a personal, so to say, position on his or her balance sheet. Perfect. So we have longitudinal data, and we observe a bunch of individuals retiring in our data. Here you can just see some screenshots about how the app looks like. This is spending, and then we also have the balances and in people's checking and savings accounts. Excellent. So let me tell you a little bit about how the pension system works in Iceland. So first of all, there's kind of something like social security. If people fall through the cracks, then that is what they get. And then most of people's retirement and pension income is from defined benefit contribution plans. So there people just contribute throughout their working life to pension funds, and then they get their annuitized and fully indexed pension income at the time they retire. And they can contribute up until some cutoff ages, right? After which there are some somewhat discretionary thresholds, in the sense that if people are beyond the age of 67, they kind of get, they get a lot reduced benefits, or the additional month of working is somewhat reduced in terms of the additional benefits than before the age of 67. Perfect. However, what we find in the data is that people don't seem to particularly care about these retirement thresholds. So what we see is that nobody really retires right after the age of reaching the age of 67. So I think the average retirement age is something like 70, and people just continue working for kind of a couple months to years after their reaching the benefits threshold. And that effectively means that the additional pension benefit from working for one more month, if you are not at the threshold, is very low. It's something like $10 per month or so. So we describe that in great detail in the paper, but you can basically think of, if I retire at the thresholds, then yes, there are some like changes in benefit, but to the extent that I'm beyond the threshold, the additional pension benefits from working one more month are very small. Okay, so here you can see just some raw data summary statistics. As said, in this paper, we look at savings and consumer debt, and here I mean liquid savings, so savings in people's checking and savings account. So stuff that they have beyond the pension savings in the system. So, and what you can see here is that, of course, pension income increases when people are retired. So that is how we classify people as retired. We see the step up in pension income. You see the average age is 71. And then you can, so in Iceland, what people do a lot is they have credit cards, but they mostly repay their credit cards in full, and then they roll over overdraft debt. And that is incredibly common in Iceland. So around 46% of the people have overdraft debt in any given month. And here what you can see in just the raw data is that retired people seem to have less overdraft debt. And that is true for, just the likelihood, the number of checking accounts that they have with overdrafts, and then also the monthly overdraft interest. So that's $24 before retirement and $17 after retirement in the raw data. Then what we can also see is that people seem to have more interest income from savings accounts. So the likelihood to have interest income from savings account increases from 30% to 50%, then the amount of interest income increases, and then also the liquidity, which is we measure in consumption days, seems to increase in the raw data around retirement. So in terms of people's personal finances, it seems that they have more money in their checking and savings accounts after retirement, and they repay some of this high interest unsecured overdraft debt, which is very common in Iceland, kind of the credit card debt in this country. Right, so we want to maybe look at this controlling for individual and month by year, or which is basically time fixed effects from our sample period, just to make sure that this is not what we see in the raw data is not driven by any aggregate trends or some selection, which is that, richer people choose to retire, but we want to document that people within each individual, they seem to decrease their overdraft debt and increase their savings after retirement. Right. So this is what we also find in the regression. So when people retire, they are 5% more likely to have an overdraft or multiple overdrafts, and they reduce their overdraft interest by 50% on average when they retire. And we kind of here look at, for the average person, at a window like 3 years before to 3 years after retirement. And then they increase their interest income, both the likelihood of having any interest income and the amount of interest income. And again, this is liquid savings. So they, of course, decumulate their pension assets, right? Because once they retire, they get this annuitized indexed pension payment every month. So effectively, they decumulate their pension savings. But in terms of the liquid savings, like what they have in their savings account, that we see increasing. So, and then we can also look at the dynamics. So here what we see is that the overdraft interest reduction is just throughout the board, year 1, 2, 3. And then we see somewhat, in terms of the interest income, we see somewhat more concentrated effects in the beginning or the first year of retirement. So just the event study, they show the same thing. So now, how can we think about these findings? So in principle, right, pension income is, or also that is what we see in the data, pension income is much lower than salary income. So people have a discrete step down in income, right? They have high salary income, then they choose to retire, so they have low pension income after that. Now, in principle, right, if I expect a step down in income, then I would save before that fall in income and then save after. But what we see seems to be the opposite. People have larger overdraft debt before retirement and seem to repay that with their lower income after retirement. And people have low savings before retirement and then they accumulate savings after retirement. So that is a little bit weird, just because their income falls. And we showed that in a bunch of this pattern is incredibly robust. We also showed it in US data, both CEX data, SCF data, as well as individual level data like PSID and HRS. And then when we looked at spending, so we also did a lot of work there, but overall we just kind of had like the spending data is a little bit inconclusive, because even if you see like a very fine category like fine dining falling around retirement, that could be in principle a work-related expense. So we weren't sure what to make of this results. So how can we explain this increase in savings? So what's happening is that consumption drops by more than income, right? That is why people are now able to repay their overdraft debt and increase their savings. So now the odd thing is that we don't see anybody retiring at the thresholds, and we know that after the thresholds, the increase from working 1 extra month in terms of this pension income is very small. So, and that means that in principle, if people would just retire 1 month before, right, they save so much because their retirement consumption is so much less that they would have an increase in kind of overall lifetime resources. So any explanation for our findings must explain why consumption drops so much, and then also why is it not optimal for the agent to just retire 1 month before, because that would increase his or her overall wealth. So, and then we looked at kind of the leading explanations for the other retirement puzzles, right? The fact that spending drops and savings increase or wealth increases after retirement, whether we have this new observation, how kind of the leading explanation squares with that. So, and work-related expenses has a little bit of a trouble here. So it's surely there. We see that also in the spending data. But if work-related expenses are so high that they make up for the difference in salary versus pension income, then people should just retire earlier, right? Because they can save so much by retiring. So, and then the other, so this is the work-related expenses explanation, which we think is not fully consistent with our finding. And then there's the longevity risk, and that is not applicable in our setting because in Iceland, the pension payments are fully annuitized and indexed. So there's no longevity earnings risk. And then it's a Nordic welfare state, so the healthcare system is very comprehensive. So there's no fat tail of healthcare expense risk as in the US. So also this explanation doesn't seem to be fully consistent with what we find. Plus, we can look at pharmacy expenses to get an idea whether health shocks are the reason that people retire, and that doesn't seem to be the case. Then we also looked at a bunch of other explanations. Most importantly, we want to make sure that it's not that people liquidate, sell their house or something like that, and that's where the money comes from when they retire. But we see all the inflows into checking accounts, so we could rule that out. Also, the information about how much extra benefits you get, etc., we have that in the paper as screenshots from the pension system. It's very easy to obtain. It's a very transparent system, so we don't think there's so much uncertainty about it. Perfect. So I have 2 more minutes. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the theoretical explanations that we were considering. So we were considering something like insufficient planning, or some type of, people don't want to think about their wealth after retirement before they are there. And basically what we discovered, what we need in order to explain the simultaneous decrease in spending and increase in savings is some type of time inconsistency problem, and we just chose to use quasi-hyperbolic discounting. Although, as said, that could be something like cognitive constraints, in the sense of that, before retirement, people don't really want to think about their wealth after retirement, and that brings about this hyperbolic discounting function. So this is one thing that we looked at, quasi-hyperbolic discounting, and then also what we discovered is you need this change in the present bias to explain the joint observation of decreasing consumption and increasing savings. And this change in the present bias is then also brought about by one other preference specification, and that is reference dependence. And here, the uncertainty of labor income brings about a time inconsistency problem, which is absent after retirement. So people can plan more easily when they have a sure stream of income, and eliminate that time inconsistency problem, because then an increase in consumption today is a sure loss tomorrow. So for these 2 preference specifications, where you have an actual degree change in the degree of the time inconsistency at retirement, we can replicate our results in the sense that we find a fall in consumption and a simultaneously increase in savings at retirement. Right, and I'm just out of time. So we look at what I think is kind of the intersection of the 2 existing retirement puzzles, and we have a new empirical observation, and we looked at the leading explanations of the existing puzzles to see whether they are applicable for this kind of like out of sample test of our new empirical observations, but we find they cannot fully explain that. And I'm going to stop right here. Thank you.
Thank you, Michaela, for also policing yourself so excellently. And you're right on time. Thank you. So Victoria, over to you.
All right. So sharing my screen, can you see this?
Yes.
Okay, so, all right. Thanks for coming, everyone, and thanks to the organizers for putting together a really great program. So this is very early stage work that's going to showcase an upcoming project with a new survey initiative. And it's joint work with Andrew and Yoon from NYU and Soren and Johan from the University of Copenhagen. Okay, so the main focus in this project is going to be risk and uncertainty in retirement income. So the income that people live off of once they've stopped working. And retirement income typically includes a combination of Social Security, income from pension schemes, and what comes out of these defined contribution plans. And so these defined contribution accounts are the most risky and are going to be the main focus in our notion of retirement income. So there's already a ton of work out there about labor income, exploring its properties and its determinants, and less so about retirement income. So in particular, like life cycle models about savings and consumption usually assume that households know their retirement income with certainty. And this might have been reasonable when most retirement income did come from predictable sources. But in many developed countries around the world, defined contribution funds have becoming a lot more popular. So what are these DC funds? So this is just a retirement fund where you and your employer contribute contribute each year, and then the ultimate payout on retirement is not known with certainty. So in the US, an example would be a 401k account. You and your employer each contribute a portion of your income each period, and it's invested into assets that are risky, but that can potentially yield a high rate of return. And in Denmark, which we'll be using for our study, they've been starting to be phased in during the early 1990s. And so with the rollout of these DC accounts, retirement income is becoming more risky. And in this project, we want to understand the implications of this risk. So first and foremost, we want to quantify it and understand people's perceptions of it. So to this end, we designed and fielded a new survey in Denmark that, among other things, elicited participants' subjective expectations and uncertainty around their retirement income. And today I'll show you some of our findings so far about what individual characteristics retirement income uncertainty is associated with. And then the data infrastructure in Denmark is really great because it'll allow us to merge people's survey respondents with their wealth and income histories from the Danish register. So we have really great data there, which allows us to use it as a lab to answer questions that we can't in the US. And then in the second part of this presentation, I'll show you how we've been using a structural model to understand how different aspects of retirement income uncertainty affect savings motives over the life cycle. And then finally, I'll wrap up by explaining our most important priorities for the next stage of this project. So now I'll describe our data. So the first source of data, which we collected in the first year of what's going to be an annual ongoing panel, is what we're calling the Copenhagen Life Panel. So this is a large-scale random sample of the Danish population. It's a survey of them, made possible by the University of Copenhagen and Statistics Denmark. We designed it late last year, and our first wave of data was collected online earlier this year. And we intend this to be a yearly panel where we re-ask a set of standard questions and sometimes introduce new special topics each year. In the first wave, we collected a variety of information. This included basic questions about labor income and labor supply, Social Security, and if they have any pension schemes. And then there's also a lot of questions on job search, behavior and expectations, as well as earnings potential, all kinds of stuff. But for this presentation, we're going to be focused on the expectations and uncertainty data that we collected about retirement income. So we asked people for the amount of pension wealth that they currently hold, which includes how much they have in these defined contribution accounts, and also how much income they expect to get out of their pension when they retire. And I'll get into exactly how we ask these questions in the next slide. And then in the future, we'll also be able to link these respondents to their records in the Danish register, which includes administrative information on income, jobs, and different types of wealth. So we'll be able to ask questions like, do people with riskier income histories exhibit more pessimistic expectations or higher degrees of uncertainty? So we're working on that in ongoing work. Okay, so getting into the specifics of how we measure uncertainty. So in order to get people to report their subjective probability distribution over retirement income, we're using this bins and balls technique from Delavand and Rowetter. And so this is a visual method that's designed to yield internally consistent answers when getting people to report probability distributions. So the exact question we asked participants is the following. Suppose your future pension savings evolve as you expect. If you were to convert all this wealth into a steady income stream, lifelong pension at the age of the expected retirement age, this is the expected retirement age that they reported in a question earlier, how much annual income do you believe it would provide? So then after they see that question, they're asked to report a minimum and a maximum value that their pension income can take. And then based on these values, we divide up that interval into 6 equally spaced bins and ask them to distribute 20 balls into each of these bins that represent how likely they think their income is to fall in each interval. And so this picture here is an example of what participants see on their screen when they answer the bins and balls questions. And as they play around with the amounts, the picture is updated live on screen. So then what do we do with this information? So based on the responses here, we use the elicited distribution to calculate each person's percent standard deviation of pension income. And that's going to be our measure of uncertainty and the outcome variable of interest for today. And so we're concerned, notice, with like the second moment of the subjective retirement income distribution. So we're going beyond just point estimates of the mean, which are commonly seen in surveys that collect subjective expectations data. And in particular, we believe we're the first to measure uncertainty in the context specifically of retirement income. And then once we have these measures in hand, we'll show it how it correlates in the cross section with other variables we collected in the survey. Another thing we've been mindful about is also making sure that the expectations we collected with this bins and balls method seems reasonable. And so to get at this, let's think about like reasons why uncertainty would vary with age. So one source of retirement income uncertainty directly comes from labor income uncertainty. So like I don't know my future path of income, which means that there's uncertainty in how much I'm going to be able to contribute to the account in the coming years. This kind of concept will reappear when we get to the model. And since younger workers have a lot more time left until retirement, there are more possible paths that income can take. So we should see uncertainty be declining with age. And so here I show you that this is exactly what we've been finding. So the bar graph shows the average retirement income uncertainty within each age group, split into respondents who are, actually that's on the next slide. Yeah, so you can see a clear downward trend with respect to age. And this is reassuring to us because it seems like people are reporting distributions that make sense along some dimension. And like again, the rationale for this is that as they near retirement, they get a better and better idea of like how much pension wealth they have and what this would translate to in terms of retirement income. So we're reasonably sure that we're confident that the bins and balls method is giving us sensible answers. Another place where we think this is also making sense is when you split this into working and non-working respondents. And there's a clear pattern where the non-working respondents report more uncertainty within almost any age group. And so this group contains unemployed workers, so it could reflect their uncertainty in terms of future wages. It also contains workers who aren't in the labor force, which could indicate some type of general inattention towards retirement plans. And then I just want to add like another useful thing to think about is how large these numbers are. And so for context, we asked the same question for 1 year ahead income expectations. And we found that the percent standard deviation on pension income uncertainty was higher than that. So on average, these were about 10.3%, whereas for 2020 income, these were about 6.3%. So there's at least as much uncertainty towards retirement income as there is for like future labor market income. And then here, I just want to show that these results hold up when controlling for other variables. So you can see the age gradient across all three columns and a significant effect for the not working dummy. We can also see that like women are half a percentage point more uncertain as men with the same characteristics. And then there are also some like significant relationships with future labor force status rather than income. So people who report themselves as more likely to lose their job are marginally more uncertain. People who are more likely to retire within 5 years are less uncertain. And we also ask people about how much uncertainty they have around their retirement age. These people are also more uncertain around their retirement income. And I don't have it here, but there's also a correlation between uncertainty in labor income and retirement income. And so that's kind of like another manifestation of labor income uncertainty passing through to retirement income uncertainty. So that's another place where we feel confident in the bins and balls method of elicitation. And so we plan to do more analysis on how uncertainty relates to other variables once we've also incorporated the information about income and wealth from the Danish register. So, okay, so now I'll discuss how our structural model is going to fit into our project. So the goal here is to use the model to understand which components of retirement income risk have the largest effect on economic decisions like savings and consumption over the life cycle. And we eventually want to learn about the effects that policies might, different policies that might alter the amount of income uncertainty after retirement. And so our main modeling innovation here is we're going to take like an off-the-shelf life cycle consumption savings model, and we're going to drop the assumption that income in retirement is certain and known to everyone at all stages of the life cycle. So specifically what we're doing is we're just adding, we're just taking like an incomplete markets consumption savings model and adding a risky defined contribution fund that's going to become a big source of the income that agents live off of once they retire. So I don't have time to show any equations in this presentation in detail, so I'll just give you like the highlights of the model so you can understand how it works. So agents face the deterministic life cycle. They start at age 25, retire at 65, live until 80, and they leave a bequest. Labor income is risky, so it contains a permanent and a transitory component, which is a very common and parsimonious way to model income in this literature. Each period, 8% of their income is contributed to a DC account, and that 8% is around the average contribution amount in Denmark right now. And then the DC plan leads to risky labor market income for risky retirement income for two reasons. So the first comes directly from labor income contributions. So if someone receives a bad permanent shock, that's going to reduce their contributions in the year to come. And then the other comes from investment risk. So their wealth in the DC account is invested into a risky asset that also has a high rate of return, but it's also volatile. So like large swings in the rate of return can depress the wealth that's accumulated in there. And so one part of our analysis is going to aim to figure out how much extra savings is coming from these two components. And then once people make their contribution to the DC fund each period, they make their consumption and savings decisions. For their savings, they have access to a risk-free asset. And then upon retirement, the wealth in the DC account is used to purchase an annuity that pays a fixed amount in each 15 years of retirement. And we're converting this using like a standard annuity formula, but in reality, the true formula may be more complex and not well understood by households. So this is another source of retirement income uncertainty that we plan to dive into on the next wave in the survey. I'll touch on that a little bit more at the end. And so with this model, we're going to compare 4 environments that lead to different amounts of retirement income risk. The first is just the model laid out on the last slide. The second removes the investment risk from the DC account and still leaves in contribution risk. So comparing these two would tell us what role the risky returns play in savings decisions. Scenario 3 is a way of removing both the return risk and contribution risk from retirement income. So instead of having a DC account, workers invest in a defined benefit scheme, the payout of which is known with certainty. And what happens here is that the workers pay a tax that allows the government to fund the DB program that contributes 8% of the average income of all workers at that age. So it's redistributed because everybody pays a proportional tax but receives back the same amount. So for low-income workers, their contribution will be lower than what they get back. And then everybody ends up with the same amount in retirement. So here, everything is completely known in terms of retirement income. And then the fourth scenario is just the most realistic one in terms of what's in place in Denmark right now. It's the same as scenario 1, but we add on a fixed Social Security income of 70,000 kroner per year that everybody gets with certainty. And to fund that, everybody pays a proportional tax each year of their working life. So all of the risks are still there, but there's just a new source of certain income. I'm not going to get that much into the calibration, so income and pension wealth I'll show quickly because these are just based on like exogenous parameters, and so we can see that median income is these are median income, each line, a solid line in the charts, and then the dots are the data. And so by construction, all of the scenarios have the same labor income process because we wanted people to have the same resources throughout life, but change the risk structure and source of uncertainty in retirement. So that's why the retirement income looks different in each of these scenarios. And then the yellow, which includes the Social Security, is closest to reality. So we are confident that we got the yellow lines right. Pension income real quick, we phase in the DC scheme at age 35 in order to get closer to the amount of pension wealth that people actually end with in the data. Because it's lower, so it's a little bit lower than in the model because the older workers who make up this like age 65 account, age 65 dots on the graph, haven't been contributing their entire life to this pension scheme. And so because we don't have this overlapping structure, we compromised for now and thought about phase it in later, but ultimately we're going to be interested in the fully phased-in system. So I'll show you the results for both.
Victoria, I'm super confident in you. You have about 5 minutes.
Yeah, I can finish. So these are the wealth profiles where wealth is supposed to represent any form of wealth that's not pension wealth. And then the dashed lines are the 20th and 80th percentiles in the model. So you can see that there's sort of a ranking in how much the median worker saves in all of these scenarios. So comparing the blue and the green, you see that here investment returns risk only increases savings by a very modest amount. And then by moving to the DB scenario in red, you get even less wealth accumulation. And that's coming from retirement income becoming completely safe and certain. And so the only wealth accumulation motives here is coming from savings in order to buffer against income shocks in the working life, as well as having like extra wealth to consume off of in retirement and for bequests. And then moving into this realistic scenario that just adds 70,000 kronas of retirement income leads you to the yellow line. And so you can see that just by introducing this like safe and certain social security payment, agents accumulate even less. And that's interesting because like the risks from the DC account are still there, but that additional small amount of saved income reduces the need for precautionary savings. And you don't get these you don't get these inequality effects on the upper end. And the way to look at this is that now people have access to two sources of retirement savings, both in contributions to Social Security and this DC account. And they don't have any say in how much goes into this. So in this sense, some agents oversave for retirement and reduce the amount of liquid wealth that they need to hold. Potentially because of the lower liquid wealth holdings, this might leave people more vulnerable to income shocks throughout their working life. And so you can see that there's some interesting patterns in consumption as well. So except for here, we actually get some spikes up. And so these happen because in the realistic scheme, the yellow, agents are forced to save into both the DC account and Social Security. So they accumulate more wealth than they would like, especially on the high end, because these people save up to buffer for bad income shocks that are never realized. And in this case, they see a large increase in consumption once income uncertainty resolves itself because they have a lot of extra wealth to consume off of. And so this kind of begs the question as to whether there's an optimal amount of Social Security, because it helps to insure against income risk in retirement, but it also forces people to save for retirement more than they would like to. And so they compensate by holding less liquid assets, which makes them less able to smooth through bad income shocks throughout their life. And so it sort of shifts the risk around. And in the future, we plan to explore like what the best combination of policies would be from a welfare standpoint. I'll skip the fully phased in system and then just kind of conclude with like what we plan to do in the future. So I think one main priority is going to be to bridge the survey together with the model better. And the hope is that the survey is going to give us new ways to identify our parameters and invalidate or invalidate some of the behavior we see in the model. And so one idea was, one thing that we really want to do is write these new strategic survey questions for the next, for the 2021 wave of our survey. And so these questions ask participants to put themselves in hypothetical scenarios that we design and convey to participants. And so we're writing questions that are designed to elicit how much people are willing to pay to move into the different environments that we explored in the model. And then this would help us inform the amount of risk aversion people face, as well as how much risk people perceive in income and the investment returns process. And then another area we're excited to develop SSQs for is for measuring that uncertainty and inattention toward that annuity formula that I mentioned before. So we'd give like people hypothetical amounts of pension wealth and ask them how much they think this would convert to in terms of pension income. And then that would allow us to introduce like uncertainty in this annuity formula in the model, which is another source of retirement income uncertainty that no one's fully explored and that we think could be really important. So that wraps things up. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to your comments.
Thanks, Victoria. And now, Soren, are you poised?
2 seconds.
By the way, I think for the after Soren has spoken, I think panelists are typing lots of chat, which we'll go through. So Michaela in particular, I think, has already been answering busily. So we'll look forward to kind of hearing a little bit from Michaela's perspective. Any attendee can type something, I believe, into the Q&A. And Ashwita will tell me if I'm lying.
Yes.
So you can.
You see my screen?
Okay, good. So, please.
Do you see my screen?
Yes, not as huge as it could be. It's kind of the presentation itself.
It's the full
I see.
screen up.
Oh, that's fine. That's good. That's fine.
We tried. Okay, thank you to Andrew for putting me on the program. So to discuss both Michaela's paper and our own presentation. So I guess I'll just, given this odd combination, I'll just give a few comments to Michaela's great paper, and then I'll, just talk a little bit about the broader outlook of the research project that underlies Victoria's presentation. So Michaela has a long-standing collaboration with Arne Olofsen, and they have these fantastic transaction data from this Icelandic budget app. And actually, Michaela and Arne, they are one of they are among the pioneers in this area, which is just really great, and they've produced a great series of good papers. So in this paper, they show evidence that consumption drops and liquid savings actually increase at retirement, and that is kind of a puzzle that is not, immediately reconcilable with the standard model. So what they do is to build a model that encompasses a range of different special hypotheses. There's both the standard model and the hyperbolic model. There's a temptation model, and then there's the news utility model, which I guess, as far as I understand, flows from Michaela's great restart paper from 2017. So the trick that Michaela and Arne are doing here is to, except for the news utility model, they change the patient parameter at retirement in order to try to do as much as they can within these models to generate this combination of effects, and these models are not able to do that. The news utility model has a discontinuity at retirement because that's where all uncertainty is resolved, and basically it's a cake-eating problem from then on. And one of the most important things of this approach is that it provides sort of a unifying framework to discriminate between these different self-control models. So actually, the news utility model is the most general model, and all the other models, they are special cases of that framework. And it appears that the news utility model is the only model that can plausibly explain that you see both a combination of consumption falling at retirement and savings increasing. I hope I gave you justice, Michaela, in this interpretation of your work. So I'm just listing here a couple of points that I thought might be worth thinking about. All the explanations, as far as I understand it, they are about a sharp change in consumption and savings at the point of retirement. And in order to sort of make the empirical part focused on exactly testing between these models, I think it would be useful to focus all the empirical exercises are actually documenting that there is a sharp change at retirement. And I guess you do some of that you have some event figures, and you showed also some regression estimates. And it was not clear to me whether there are power issues in the data set, but it's kind of not super clear from the figures whether there actually is a sharp change right at retirement, or whether it's sort of a more smooth change that happens around retirement. I was also wondering, so it seems, and you showed these results too, it was a little bit unclear to me how many observations actually drive this combination of consumption fall and savings increase. So when I looked at the interest income indicator, the way I interpret that was that there is a dummy variable that takes value 1 if interest income is increasing. If I interpret that as the number of individuals who are actually increasing interest income, that means increasing savings, then it's actually only 4% of the individuals in the data set that increase savings at the onset of retirement. So also it seems like, and you also highlighted that yourself, it seems like interest income is actually only higher for the first 24 months after retirement. So I thought it might be, so first of all, I was thinking about, so I think it's entirely reasonable to think that you know, some fraction of the population can have self-control problems. And I was wondering whether this number actually gives some kind of indication of how many people, the sort of 4%, about how many people one would suppose had these types of self-control problems. So one suggestion would be to perhaps look more into the heterogeneity that that actually exists in these data. So one thing that is not that I was not able to understand from the analysis, which is by the way very comprehensive, is whether the drop in spending is actually driven by the same people who actually also increase savings. So, and also to perhaps dig in a bit more into whether the savings increase is in fact temporary, as the result seems to indicate, because then maybe it's just, you know, retirement is a new situation, and I just need some time to adjust to the new situation. And along those lines, you have this very brilliant setup where you can sort of well, at least you have the framework to test these different types of self-control models and the rational model against each other. But I was wondering, since the retirement, so the way to approach this is that there are some discrete change at retirement. Could one also think about other discrete changes that could be happening at the point of retirement? So, for example, I'm just completely absorbed with my work, and to be honest, I'm probably terrified about when I have to retire, because who knows what I'm going to spend my time on. So I guess there's a bit of utility uncertainty about what is actually my consumption needs when I retire, and I guess maybe I will only learn about these consumption needs when I actually do retire. And I think that combination, or that type of phenomena, that would also have the potential to generate a drop in savings, a drop in consumption and an increase in savings. That was a mistype there. But great paper, and I applaud very much, as you know, all your work based on these fantastic transaction data. Okay, so let me just step back a little bit and try to say what I think characterizes these two papers. And I think that is that they use new data. And Michaela's paper, Victoria's presentation is based on, I guess I've switched the paper numbers here. Victoria's and our paper is about new subjective data within a standard, and we try to interpret them within the context of a standard model. And Michaela, she uses new observational data from these budget apps, transaction data, and try to embed them to interpret them within the context of a new utility model. So both papers are characterized by using new data to identify or document aspects of behavior that we did not know, or which were less salient before these two papers came out, became public. So again, I guess I have already said the last two things. So let me just spend the last bit of time sort of advertising for our research program that Victoria presented something from. So we are a team consisting of Andrew and myself, and then there's Victoria, as you know, and then there's Yungik, a PhD student from NYU, who's specializing in survey design, and then there's a PhD student from University of Copenhagen, Johan Severud, who is has an extreme amount of knowledge about how to link these registry data to survey data and how to conduct all these surveys that we're doing. So basically, the philosophy that we have been trying to develop this project around is to build a new data set that combines sort of the best of the two worlds, so the subjective world and the objective world. And the themes that we are focusing on are in particular expectations, and we spent quite a lot of energy designing a graphical interface that actually enables us to quantify these expectations. We're also interested in memory, and we spend quite a lot of energy also on modeling contingent behavior. So let me just try to show you a little bit about the Danish research data infrastructure. Victoria also briefly commented on it. So the entire Danish population, they are recorded in a population registry. There are about 5.5 million people in Denmark. This population registry has existed for many years. So we have access to it actually since 1980. And that population registry allows us to construct households because we know who are family connected. So we can also link to parents if we're interested in that. So we can actually sample from this population registry and then contact people and ask them questions using custom survey designs.
Soren, Soren, you must understand how hard this is for me to say, but you only have about 5 minutes.
Yes, I'll be there. Then we can link back to the population registry, and then the population registry can be linked to all sorts of registries. And here I've just listed 4 different. We can link to the income tax registry where we know annual income, we know wealth, total wealth. We also have an employer link. We also have some very detailed monthly data on transfers and earned income. They go from 2008, and there we also have the employer-employee link. We have a complete education registry and we also see GPA from middle and high school. And this is the last box is our health data. So we see hospitalization and we see the use of GPs and specialists. And we also have a birth registry, so we can actually see birth weight and stuff like that. So there are lots of things, and this is just a short summary of it. So the way it works when we do these surveys is that we send out letters to a public email folder that every person in Denmark has. And so I've sent out letters like this, and then they click a link there is in the middle to access the questionnaire. And I think by now I've probably contacted personally between 5 and 10% of the Danish population. To the right, you see the online, just one of the balls and bins questions from the online questionnaire that Victoria already showed. So I just want to, on the last, one of the last slides, just say that, so Victoria's presentation illustrates the philosophy of the entire program quite well. We combine subjective and registry data to inform a model. We use subjective data to document important heterogeneity and expectations. We will use SSQs to model key trade-off or to understand key trade-offs in the model. And registry data, they document all the outcomes and the life histories that we're interested in. Contingent behavior. Just wanted to show you one example of contingent behaviors that we've been trying to ask about. So we ask people, what's the probability that you'll be fired within the next 12 months? And then we ask about income using balls and bins, conditional on not being fired. And then if fired, we ask conditional income if both the chance that you'll get a job immediately and then conditional income, the chance that you'll get a job within 1 year and conditional income, and then the residuals down here. And that allows us to actually calculate individual treatment effects. So we can actually, because we then see expected incomes in both in and out of unemployment, we can calculate the cost of being fired, for example. And since we got an individual measure of the treatment effect for each individual, we can actually draw the entire distribution of these treatment effects in the population and see how the incidence of these costs are. Okay, so we've done the first wave in 2020. You've heard about the topics. We're going to do one in January 2021, where we're going to repeat, and it's going to be a longitudinal survey because we can actually return to the same people that we asked last year. And we have also a section that we haven't really decided yet about what to put in. Okay, so let me just wrap up. So we have some stuff about contingent behavior. We're also interested in contingent predictions, so which is probably particularly interesting here in the COVID times. And we've obtained support from the NOMIS Foundation for that, and we are very grateful for that. Exposed, we can then actually verify whether these contingencies they played out and learn whether responses they line up with the expectations. And we get that information from the registries in due course. So then we can also, we also plan to learn about how individuals deal with unanticipated adjustments to income, because we have expectations and we're later going to get the realizations from the admin data, so we can see the extent to which people they get realizations that are different from the expected outcomes. Then we also, of course, can, given the longitudinal aspect of the survey, we can look at how expectations adjust. And actually, we can look at the entire subjective distribution. So not whether only the mean changes, but also the variance and potentially the third moment. The last question we asked in the survey was what is the probability that you're going to face a recession in 2020? And the average stated probability was 25%. But then COVID came along, and I guess we previewed that there's going to be a lot of action in these expectations data from the next round. Thank you so much. Andrew, you're muted.
You're on mute, Andrew.
Oh. Okay, I think the way this should go is we have a lot of chat, and Michaela, maybe you could comment first. Victoria, it would be usual to let you comment too on Soren's comments, but that might not be appropriate this time. So he likes your work a lot, I can promise you. But Michaela, you have to comment. You also have a lot of back and forth in the webinar. You might wish to kind of take over the chat and describe the chat and give some comments also on Soren.
Okay, well, thank you so much for reading the paper and your comments. Just two small things I noticed. So the 4% is just the people who didn't have any savings, right? It's a savings indicator who didn't have any savings before retirement and then start saving after retirement. So that's the 4% increase. But then there are all these people who had some savings before retirement and then increased their savings after retirement. So the savings in the existing interest income. But you're absolutely right that it would be really nice to kind of have like an individual level mean difference distribution, you know, to see kind of like how it looks. We actually haven't done this yet. I'm assuming it looks kind of normally distributed with a positive mean, or you know, for interest income and a negative mean for overdrafts. But this is something we can do to make sure it's not binomial. And then there was one other thing. Oh yeah, the new. So in terms of the models, just what we showed theoretically is that you need this change in the effective discount factor or the effective time inconsistency problem to generate our results. So, and that can either be come about by a change in the hyperbolic discounting factor or news utility. But in principle, we are kind of like thinking about this a lot more broadly. So your explanation, for example, that I just don't know that I needed so little consumption or that I can save so much by retiring, that is not known to me, that is entirely plausible. So we kind of think that this, like, you know, encompasses a bunch of different explanations. And then the only thing that came up in the chat was a little bit of inventory savings. So it could be that people just have more irregular lump sum expenses. So, however, what we see in the data is kind of in terms of the savings, yes, there's an initial increase, whereas like with overdraft debt, it just seems to be a reduction like every year. So interest income is initial increase, but then there's no decrease. So it kind of stays constant. So that's why we don't really think it's inventory savings, but of course we are somewhat limited because in the end, we only have like 3 years or so post period for the average person. Yeah, and also in terms of Victoria's paper and doing the same in the Danish data, that sounds really cool. So I'm gonna now pass it on to you, or maybe the audience has more questions.
So Victoria, do you want to make any direct comments?
Yeah, maybe I thought I would mention the fact that we get in our model like a consumption increase on retirement, and then Michaela's whole paper was about the decrease. I mean, so yeah, the mechanisms like I emphasized in the presentation came from like an off-the-shelf first pass model. I mean, there are a number of things we can change that would break this. Like one would be like, I think in this model, like lengthening the potential lifespan and adding some death risk would mean that our uncertainty is not fully resolved after retirement. So I think here we could be like overstating the resolution of uncertainty. And if we had this, then it might mean that people need to keep saving after retirement in case they live for a long time, and which would leave them less wealth to consume with. I mean, another thing might also be like, we didn't endogenize retirement. So like a bad shock might force people out, and then you'd have a lot of people entering retirement with lower amounts of wealth. I mean, in any case, we plan to like look into use the Danish register a lot more to look into like what exactly is going on around retirement. We're able to back out consumption because we have the wealth and the income data, and then we'll have a better idea of like the consumption dynamics around retirement in Denmark. And then like with the survey, like we're hoping like whatever we find, that we're hoping with like no matter what we find in the register, that like the survey will be able to kind of point us towards theories about like what's going on around retirement and like during retirement. And then quantitatively, we're hoping the survey will also help us like add these features to the model and like identify whatever new parameters we would need to include to kind of rationalize whatever behavior we find in the register.
Thank you. So I want to open to broader questions, and attendees can type into the Q&A, and then we'd raise them.
So we just got a question by Rosemary Nagel, actually.
Oh, excellent.
Is there anyone of you asking, how much money do you need when you retire? Löwenstein asked this question to his MBA students and was surprised how outrageously high their expected amounts were. So I suppose this is to both Michaela and Victoria.
I don't think we asked that in our survey. It's something we could potentially do.
You didn't.
No, but the word need. I mean, there's this strange vision. There's this strange vision of retirement as you're kind of dead. There are not many choices, and all you need to do is get what you need. We wouldn't ask that of a younger person. The word need. I'm just sorry. I'm objecting to the word, I guess. Michaela, you maybe you like the word.
No, I just to that point, I think so. In our setting, I guess the pension system is kind of suggestive, right, of how much money you need. And then I think what's happening is that people wake up after retirement, right? Half of them have something like $1,000 or $2,000 in overdraft debt. Right? And then they're like, oops, maybe I'm going to reduce that overdraft debt now because now I'm retired. And in fact, maybe it is more of a pie eating problem. And, then they go ahead and do that and accumulate a little bit of savings to make themselves feel better. So I think there is some like uncertainty, or that people don't like to think about it or quantify exactly how much they need. And I think that is definitely going on.
Michaela, in your data, can you tell whether at some point whether expenses go up? So for example, if you might have medical expenses, so maybe when you retire at 70, you don't have much expenditures, but if at like 80, you anticipate having a lot of medical expenditures, then that could, I think, explain your pattern. Because I feel like just the fact that savings looks higher at the moment of retirement doesn't tell us that people aren't smoothing the marginal utility of consumption. I think what would be more puzzling is if like expenditures never go up. But for that, I think you need longer run data.
Yeah, so we are somewhat, so the Icelandic setting though, in principle, is not a situation where you face these like large medical expense risks. So even pharmacy expenses are capped at some point. So there's a copay, but they are capped. So that's why we can look a little bit into pharmacy expenses to see whether it's health shocks that make people retire. But then also in principle, if I know I'm going to have large medical expense risk at 80, I should already start saving before retirement, right? Like, why would I start saving after my income is lower? So that is also right in principle. And then we just need like some type of update and information about that. But there's like one other element you know, that we still need, which is why kind of we think the true explanation is some kind of like cognitive constraints or planning behavior or something that is better after retirement than before.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you would need like the Aguiar and Hurst critique along with like expenditures going up at some point. Like I think those two things could do it, but I agree you need like one other thing, either information updating or just like the true, like it's a mismeasurement of true consumption utility through like that kind of a critique.
Yeah, sorry, can I just re-up the question about interpreting the reduction in late fees and overdrafts? And maybe this is consistent with what you were saying, and I just got a little bit confused, but is it fair to think of this as when you retire, you have more mental bandwidth, so you can keep track of your bills better, you can keep track of your liquidity? Is that the story that you were?
Yeah, that could be it, right? So something like, oh, before I actually retire, I haven't really thought about, you know, what I really need in terms of consumption. And then after I retire, I'm like, oh, I actually need quite little and I have all this overdraft debt. So now I'm going to repay it and also accumulate some savings. So that is entirely consistent, right? We need two things to explain our finding. One is why consumption falls so much, right? And that could be work-related expenses or less consumption needs. And second, how come that they didn't just retire 1 month early, right? Given how much I can save from retiring, and that could be something like information. Exactly.
But this one I still didn't quite understand, Michaela, because when people retire, you can think of it as people engaging in a different kind of work. Right? What is this different kind of work? It's I'm trying really, really hard to keep track of all of my bills now, which is unpleasant. Whereas before when I was working, it was like, well, I'm officially employed. I don't have the time and bandwidth to keep track of my bills. So that's one kind of work people engage in. Another kind of work is they're price shopping. You know, they're trying very hard to keep track of where are the lowest prices. So now that means that they can obtain the same level of kind of material consumption for a much lower price. You know, and third, they're doing fewer other things. You know, they're engaging more in home production and so forth. So if it's a transition from kind of like formal work to all of this kind of informal work, I'm not sure, I wouldn't want to transition to that early, even if I could save more. It seems very unpleasant to me.
Yeah, that is another
I'd
explanation.
rather stay in formal work. So,
yeah, that is another explanation, like utility from working.
It's extremely costly labor that people engage in to get more consumption from the same level of expenditure.
Yeah, that is also entirely possible, right? Like two reasons, like one reason for why consumption falls, the other reason for why I continue working, right? If I derive more utility from working than the work I do after retirement, that's fine too, right? Like, you know, it's not, you just wanted to be very clear about what you need to explain this like joint finding of decreasing income and spending and increasing savings.
Yeah. Do you have a way in your data to track what people spend their money on? Like if they buy fewer branded products and like, or if you can track prices somehow and you can track if they're able to get the same bundle at a lower price? Because that could really.
Yeah, so we have super fine categories, like, you know, in terms of outside food, we have bakeries, fine dining, fast food, etc. So overall, it's just that when we look at the spending data, we kind of find the same as like Aguiar and Hurst, right? Which is like, yeah, it seems like work-related expense categories fall by more than non-work-related expense. We also have non-work-related expense categories fall, but I feel like in the end, how much you learn from that is somewhat limited because it depends on your interpretation, right? Like, let's say I see a leisure category fall, well, but that could be because I went out with my co-workers, right? Like spending in bars falls, but well, that could be a work-related expenses because I went out with my co-workers. So, you know, in the end, I feel like with the spending data, it's all in the end how you interpret it. because you can interpret any expense basically as work-related versus not, right? Or like as marginal consumption utility increasing versus decreasing. Like, yeah, maybe I buy like more non-branded products, but does that increase or decrease my consumption utility? Depends on your interpretation. So that's why I feel like there was only so much we can learn extra from the spending, but from the savings, that kind of gave us like an out-of-sample test, so to say, for the existing explanations, like work-related expenses and medical expense risk. And that is what I liked about it. I felt like you can actually learn a little bit more from that.
You're on mute, Andrew.
Speak. All right, I'd like to thank Victoria, Michaela, and Soren, and let's go on our brief break, and people can stick around to continue conversation, but that's not officially the conference anymore at the moment. Everybody could take their break. I'll see you 12:55. No, what am I saying? 11:30.
15 minutes.
15 minutes, 11:45, I can't read.
11:45 Eastern.
I'll see you. All right.
And I'm going to stop recording then.
Thanks,
maybe,
everyone.
but maybe not. So we're going to actually keep recording because we want to get the dirt on you. We want to see what you're doing in this period. We may or may not edit it, or we may or may not blackmail you with it. We'll see what we do in the fullness of time. And we can edit. So the right thing is to record in case the conversation, is interesting as it might be. Michaela, I actually wanted to plant you with a question which you might email a reply to, which is, what would you ask?
Yeah, we actually, we got started with the project, which is like Gallup actually has a way to survey Icelandic people. So, and the price was something like $8,000. And we were kind of applying for some grants for that. But then COVID happened. There was like, my research budget got reduced by me to the emergency amount.
This stuff is crazy. Listen, yeah, I think the subject has to be gone into. So I believe you will and must get support, and maybe I should email Columbia. But if you complain to NYU, I'll complain to Columbia. All right. Anyway, think about it. I mean, you might have thought about it yourself. So
yeah, but I think that survey. So I was like looking also at like pension income uncertainty. I thought was super interesting because we know very little. Or like also what Rosie mentioned, which is like, do people actually know how much they need to save? Like, yeah, some of us probably have a spreadsheet, and in which we like kind of figure out how much, like, should we save 10% or 20% of our income? But probably most people kind of like, don't think so much about this, and especially not if you have like a self-control problem and there are all this stuff that you want to buy, like there's like the new sofa that you want to buy, and then there's like the fancy restaurant that you want to go to and all that, and I think that then just results in like less savings and less thinking about savings.
In that context, one thing I was wondering is the balls in bins elicitation method that Victoria has been using. Have you compared people's subjective expectations with what's actually realistic?
Should I ask that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So we haven't done that with this project yet, but I've done it I've done some more simple probabilistic expectations, and there we've lined up with what's in the registries on income, and that looks I mean, on average they match quite well, but there are obviously many deviations, individual deviations, so that's what can then be thought of as sort of an unanticipated shock, if you like.
Right. But so do you have a take of how much of the variance in the subjective beliefs is objective and how much is confusion?
No, that we don't have. And that's probably, I guess that's you know, Victoria mentioned that we had in mind thinking about conversion risk or conversion uncertainty. And that's, I guess, is just one of those confusion, you know, levels that you might think of. I guess also it could just be general ignorance about what's going on. But no, we don't have a clear measure of what's objective and what's subjective.
And that's largely because we don't have a clear measure of what's objective.
Yes.
So it's
I
going
think like
it's going to be a little hard.
I was wondering how much of it was knowable and how much of it was unknowable. Like, I've saved a ton and I have no clue what my income will be in retirement. I haven't sat down and actually gone through the numbers and calculated this. I just went on the Social Security website when in between I realized, actually, I'm getting a pretty good chunk from Social Security. I hadn't really even realized that. I mean, that's all knowable. And then there's the, you know, just the random fluctuations in the stock market and, you know, random sources of income and inheritance. Do you have any idea how many people have thought about their retirement income?
I mean, so one of the things that we do know is that the pension and insurance industry have actually made a homepage where people can log on and where they collect all accounts that exist in the market for this particular person that logged on. And so people can actually log on and they can see their account balance, and they can see also.
Do you know if someone's logged on? Do you ask them, have you logged on to this website and figured out what you're supposed to get?
Unlike almost any other registry here in Denmark, that particular registry is private, so we can't.
But you could ask people if they had, as part of the
that's
subjective expectation
a good
elicitation.
question. We should
Soren,
do that.
didn't you call up like your pension company and ask them like what, like you literally asked them what the formula is for like ending wealth and like how it converted to income, and they like couldn't even tell you?
So I don't know. I contribute to a pension fund for economists and lawyers, and
Economists and lawyers.
Yeah, so it's a specialized pension fund with a very homogeneous, I guess, group of contributors. And I asked them how my wealth was going to be transformed into an annuity, and they couldn't give me the formula. They just they just sent me some general information, and I talked to the head of the department that was in charge. So it's kind of, you know, either they don't want to disclose it, or they, you know, it's kind of they have some. I think that's probably the case. They have some details there they don't want to disclose. I just want to, you know, from the scientific point of view, we actually ask people about the level of pension wealth, and that we observe directly in the registry, so that we can compare one-to-one. So there we can get a sense of what's, you know, that's mechanical, how much they put in each period and how much it accumulates. There are return data for each fund. So that's pretty objective. People could know about that if they want.
Well, I know the level, because in Quicken I just sum everything up and it tells me the level of my wealth, but I have no idea what my flow of income is.
But that was my point, that we've asked both about the, you know, the level of wealth and about the annuity flow, so we can actually, you know, we can see how the precision changes by comparing the answers to these two questions. And then we have the benchmark to the wealth level question, because we do see the objective wealth level.
In Denmark, at what time is the annuity rate fixed or determined? Is this at the time of your retirement, or is this predetermined?
No, it's like, so it's, you can decide yourself. So the Social Security age that's something I didn't talk too much about. It's actually life table indexed, so it's moving by cohort. The defined contribution pensions, they are, you know, you can decide yourself when to retire. I think you have to be at least 60, and there's some upper limits, which is quite high. But otherwise you can decide yourself, and that obviously influences how much you're going to get paid out every year.
But you know how much, right? There's a published table of sorts that will tell you as a function of your retirement age.
No, there, you know, it depends on the return. So they make assumptions, they make calculations based on assumptions about returns.
I see.
And then they make these calculations that you can, where you can log on and check what the projection is for your account. But unfortunately, we can't get those data. That would have been super cool.
So if you would ask people, so what do you think is your retirement need? And then you ask them, well, how uncertain they were, all your uncertainty question. And then you could tell them, well, you need that much. And if they overestimated, maybe they change some anxiety levels. I don't know whether you measure that. But this can be very different for rich or poor people. I mean, all of us, I mean, we don't care whether we know because we probably have enough. But then those who, the very low end, I mean, you will have some inverted U-shape probably answers for that.
People once what their consumption would be in retirement and how far it would fall. And people predicted a pretty large fall, and they were on average pretty accurate in their predictions. So
but how old were they?
Although this were TIA craft participants, so they were, I don't know, Andrew. They were some near retirement, some after.
Well,
retirement.
then, yeah, near retirement. That's not a surprise. I mean, they will not be very much off their estimate what they need. But the question is whether, I mean, you have a whole age range from 20 to 60, and it's falling. So maybe the anxiety, uncertainty will be reduced if you tell them what they...
We found no evidence of at retirement, they suddenly were surprised by their retirement income. Consumption
They were?
Lower.
No.
Yeah, but why should you be surprised at the retirement age? I mean, the question is whether 35...
Well, that was an old explanation for the puzzle.
So could you direct people to the website that you mentioned previously and then track spending? Then, like, you know, take a 30-year-old or 35-year-old, direct them to the website and then look at, get them presumably to update some of their beliefs and then look at subsequent spending. Is that feasible in principle?
In principle, we could do that, but you know, the practical aspect of doing this is that people, they, you know, you get a small subset of respondents that get very aggressive, and you end up spending an enormous amount.
You don't understand what Soren has had to go through.
So in practice, you know, it'll take, you know, 15-20 minutes to log on to that page, and you know, already asking them to do quite a lot in answering. You know, people, they get pretty upset when we ask them about retirement wealth and retirement income, because, you know, people age less than 50, they have, you know, it's on another planet for most of them. So it's like, it's actually kind of, it's kind of a heavy questionnaire to expose people to. So while I think it's in principle a very good idea, I'm a little bit concerned about the practical aspects of doing that. But I do think we should ask people about when they most recently logged onto this page to check out their retirement balance.
Well, you could ask in your classes, yeah, and maybe get some indication, which leads you to new questions.
I'm not contributing yet, so.
Well,
following up on,
I do need to
Oh.
move us along, because in fact we've hit 11:45. And we've hit session 2, which will be on some machine learning work in the attentional sphere. And let's start with Ziad Obermann.